Well, greetings and salutations, fellow members of the movie club. Welcome. I hope you guys make yourself comfortable. Sit around a little circle. We got coffee and donuts over there in the corner. And we are so glad you've come to join us today as we talk. Every week, so glad you've come to join us today every week about our favorite films over the past, 25 years or so, although sometimes we're a little bit flexible in that rule. And today, guys, here at Movie Club, we are in for a treat because we are starting a 3-week epic journey into Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. And obviously that means today we are starting with the first of the Lord of the Rings films, The Fellowship of the Ring. One of the greatest movies of all time, which I know we end up saying that quite a bit around Movie Club, but we've been covering a lot of some of the greatest films of all time. And today is no exception as we talk about Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, the movie that kicked the whole thing off. And joining us, of course, obviously over here, fellow Movie Club member, Robert Meyer Burnett. Robert, how you doing? Cineaholic, but there's no need to get over this one. No need to get over it. Nope, no making amends for this one. Sitting over here also, the guy who has a little bit of a hard time getting through long movies, so he was really looking forward to the Lord of the Rings films. Ray Orris here. Ray, how you doing? Oh, yeah. Man, I'll tell you what. I remember the first time I saw this movie, and we'll get into it here in a second, but I still remember the first time, and a lot of people who had never read the books. Yep. Like Ray going into it and you got Sam and Frodo walking towards Mount Doom and then the credits start to roll and then people like, what the actual F? Like people I was like, what the? Like what's going on? Yep, it took a little bit for people to understand that, yeah, well listen, this is the end of part 1, man. It's they got away from the Uruk-hai.
What's even funnier is the people that I watched the movie with knew that. And none of them mentioned it. Not on purpose. Not on purpose at all, but it was just funny that everyone around me knew it, except me. I was the only
one who didn't know.
Nope.
Well, you know now, and everybody else knows as well, and we're here to talk about this great movie, Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring. Let's just start off talking about a little bit of preamble, I guess, going into it, which is, this was a movie that for a long time, Rob, probably a lot of people thought this is unfilmable. Like you can't really make this movie and you can't make it to the point that it actually looks right or feels like you're not going to be able to capture the magic that we can have in our imaginations over this thing. And then lo and behold, 20 some odd years ago, Peter Jackson is talking with Warner Brothers, a new line, and he gives them this pitch and they believe in it. The technology had gotten to the point where they could try doing stuff like this. This was, of course, the era of like the Star Wars prequels were coming. Jurassic Park had happened, which opened up a lot of possibilities for a lot of films. And they go ahead and make this. But, if it was you look back to that period of time, did you ever think, even just go back a few years, bless you, by the way, go back a few years before it actually came out, were you ever wondering if they could actually do, they did some animated stuff, but that they'd actually do a Lord of the Rings?
No, I mean, I never thought that, I wasn't a fan of fantasy cinema the way we'd seen it because it was never as good as I'd hoped. I mean, I remember seeing Dragon Slayer, which I liked, but it wasn't totally great, or Krull, or there's just something. And this, to me, Tolkien's Lord of the Rings is the template for 20th century fantasy. It all stems from his work. And, this was going to be originally made by Miramax, and it was going to be 2 films. And Peter Jackson had been making his movies in New Zealand. He'd made Bad Taste and Brain Dead and Meet the Feebles. And then he moved up to Heavenly Creatures and The Frighteners. And they were going to step up and do this. And Peter had his own cottage industry that he was making in New Zealand. And then for whatever reason, Miramax said, no, we're not going to make this anymore. So Peter went to he had like a little 5-minute reel showing what they've been doing in New Zealand, going, this is what we can do. Everyone had said no to him because Miramax had to be paid off, like $50 million. So someone had to pay them off and then agree. And the last stop that Peter Jackson was making was in Bob Shea of New Line, the head of New Line, Bob Shea's office, who he had known. And this was it. If he couldn't get anybody to buy off on this, he was going to fly back to New Zealand and shut the whole thing down because they'd been doing all this development. And he goes into Bob Shea's office I'm truncating this story. Showed him the reel, and Bob Shaye's sitting there. Lights come up after he shows him the reel, and Bob Shaye says, "So you're gonna make 2 movies for Miramax?" And Peter's like, "Yep." "Well, aren't there 3 Lord of the Rings books?" Peter's like, "Yep." And for whatever reason, Bob Shaye then and there bet the entire future of all of New Line that he'd been building up for almost 20 years.
Because what people got to remember is this was not done at the time. Like, for them to go all in and commit the amount of money that they were committing,
dude,
over 20 years ago to making all 3, like, they were going to be well into production on the 3rd film by the time the first film came out. There was no going back. There was no safety net. It was, we are all in, and they literally bet their lives on it. I mean, it's crazy.
They bet their lives, and not only that, they bet on the Kiwis.
Yeah.
You know, they bet, and what's interesting is literally the resources of an entire country, an island nation, came together under the watchful eye of Peter Jackson, but you had people like Richard Taylor and the Weta Workshop, and then Weta Digital. I mean, dude, they were creating software, like the digital grading software that they used to color grade the movie. It didn't exist. And like Massive, the software Massive, that was able to create AI orcs, and they could have armies of orcs fighting, you know, based in, they didn't have any of this before.
Yep.
And they were creating it as they went, and it was crazy.
Dude, you remember, like, in that first, the prologue, basically, and they're telling the story of the final...
The end of the Second Age,
the end
where
of
the
the
Lord of
Second
the
Age
Rings TV series leads to.
is going to lead right into. So you've got the armies of men and elves marching against, and then they kill... I still remember watching this for the first time because I'd never seen anything like it. They kill Sauron. And then, first of all the air gets sucked in, and then, boom, it blows out. And you have that super wide shot of all the armies, and you see, like dominoes, all the armies falling down backwards. And I just remember seeing that effect and going, I've never seen anything like that.
No.
Because they created it for Lord of the Rings.
And I'll tell you something, that opening, the way they set the tone with Kate Blanchett as Galadriel narrating, you know, the world has changed. I feel it, you know, in the water and all that.
In the air, I smell it in the air. Yeah.
And that opening was genius because they give you all the backstory. You know, they tell you what are the rings, what's going on, where we're at, and in that beautifully rendered, it's a montage. But it's beautifully done. They tell you the whole. They set the stage.
But I'm glad you brought that up because here's the thing. It's stuff like this when people say, like when there's a new movie coming out and people say, well, you can't just jump into that movie. You have to do these other movies first to build up to it. Lord of the Rings proves you do not. Because I'm telling you, they were doing that today. Like, let's say the Lord of the Rings movies had never been made. And they tried to make that today, and people found out they're going to start with Fellowship of the Ring. I know you'd have a lot of people are going out there, well, you can't. You haven't built up to it. Like, people aren't going to understand the history of the ring and blah, blah, blah. You know what? Peter Jackson, in 4 minutes, told every bit of important information in just it was probably even less than 4 minutes. In a couple of minutes, told everything that some people probably would have felt you needed 2 movies to tell the story of first. Said, no, here's what you need to know. Boom, boom, boom. All right, let's now go to the Shire. Like, did you, like, Ray, when you were watching it, you watched it for the first time last night since it was originally in theaters.
Yeah, but can I talk about the first time the event itself in the theater? There's only a couple movies that I remember would be like this. I mean, now it seems like every Marvel release is an event. But back then, it was ever so often there's a movie that comes out where everyone goes to see it and you see lines. One of them was Phantom Menace, this movie, The Dark Knight, and Avengers, the first Avengers. Those are all in my memory of the atmosphere of everyone excited. I didn't even know anything about Lord of the Rings, but I was there because of word of mouth, the hype. But it was a fantastic show, you know. And what came on screen, like John said, the prologue and everything was perfect. It was enough for me to understand in such a quick way, and to get into it real quick. You know.
Well, you know, the before this came out around the holidays of 2001. At Cannes in May of 2001, they unveiled like 20 minutes of the movie. And I was working for a company called Curdy Pellerin, and we started doing the special features. We hadn't seen the movie yet. We didn't know anything about it. And after the Cannes reel showed, a couple weeks afterwards, we were brought down to New Line to be shown this footage. And we're like, my boss, Michael Pellerin, was already a fanatical Lord of the Rings fan. And we're all like, we all walk into the screening room going, well, we hope this is good. Because people didn't know. I mean, everybody was buzzing about the can reel. So we sit in this theater, there's like, 20 of us. That's it, to show us this footage. And they showed a lot of the Mines of Moria. Dude, I remember sitting there thinking, not since I had seen Star Wars as a kid, which I was talking about at lunch, the Mines of Moria sequence, I'm like, finally in my life, it was the first time I'd seen full-blown epic fantasy put on screen in such a way where my jaw hit the floor. That whole Mines of Moria sequence, I was just like, oh my God. I had never, the scope, the design, the feeling of peril when the orcs, and the goblins are coming out. Oh. I mean, dude, it was like, wow. And it was one of those times, I know it was only 20 minutes, but my mind was blown. And I couldn't believe, I'm like, oh my God, we're so lucky, that we're going to be working on this movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything in there. I just remember feeling frightened every time I was supposed to be frightened. The ring, what do they call it? The ring wraiths? The ring wraiths.
Yep. The Nazgul. The nine.
The orcs terrified me, like, for the longest time afterwards. Like, I was a hobbit in this movie. Like, you could tell it's like, you could sit there and be like, yeah, there's someone underneath that black robe. There's someone underneath, but you can't in the moment when a bunch of them are coming after the hobbits. I was hiding with them. It was crazy.
John, watching this again, you know what's amazing? The first thing you see is the title, The Lord of the Rings. It comes up,
yep.
And when you hear that the whole overall theme, just with that music and the way the metal bronze Lord of the Rings comes up,
font,
with that font, you're like, okay, here we go. Like, right from the beginning, Howard Shore's music. And then as it leads into that 5-minute thing, and then you come out into the Shire and you first see, within 5 minutes that you're seeing something special.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going, I wonder if this is going to be good. You're already completely locked in.
And Kate Blanchett's voice, that open narration. I mean, it is then Isildur, son of the king, took up his father's sword. And it's just like, come on.
That moment took me to another place. I was no longer sitting in the theater. I was in this fantasy world, which was probably the most impressive thing rewatching it last night. The scope of this world was so huge to me. Like, even watching it, like, when they went to a different place, it felt like they went a long way to get to this place. Like, from the Hobbit house, whatever they call that house.
Shire.
The Shire. The green grass.
Well, and that was all done.
Was so pretty.
They were able to heighten the colors because they had created this grading software where they could go in, and it didn't exist. So they could go in and isolate areas to change the color to make it more green. And I mean, that panning shot up where it reveals the Shire as you see Gandalf going over the bridge.
Can I tell you something about that shot? Let me tell you something about that shot. My favorite book growing up was The Hobbit. All right. And I remember sitting in the theater wondering, man, I hope they're able to pull this off. The trailers were great. I'm sitting in that theater. I still remember where I was, man. I was in Ancaster, Ontario. It's a part of Hamilton, Ontario, at the Ancaster Silver City movie theater. And I remember the girl I was with, and I remember just waiting to say, I hope they pull this off. It was, the prologue was great, right? The prologue was great. But that shot you're mentioning right now, when the camera starts to pan up, and you see the Shire, you see Hobbiton, right? I almost wept because it was, look, when you go in to see movies that are based on previous existing material, it never completely matches up with what was in your head until now. And I remember that camera panned up and we saw, the Hobbit holes, and we saw like the green grass and the trees. And I literally just at that moment almost wept in my seat because it was exactly how I had pictured in my head as a child reading The Hobbit. And it seriously, just that simple moment of the camera panning up and just getting a wide establishing shot is one of the most memorable, moving moments for me in my life in a movie theater. It was incredible.
Dude, even when you first see Frodo sitting on the ground, leaning up against the tree, and all, you're late. a wizard is never late. You know, I mean, and the whole interplay between Elijah Wood and Ian McKellen, you're looking at this and you're like, this is it, man. You know, and the way they use forced perspective, no one knew how they were doing it at the time, but and just all the design work. And they had John Howe and Alan Lee, who are two of the great Tolkien illustrators. They hired them to come on and visualize all this stuff, and they were able to realize it. I mean, this is what happens when you have a creative team with Philippa, Fran, and Peter, and then you've got everybody they hired, Richard Taylor and everybody at Weta. When they get hired to make something and they really know what they're doing. Now, of course, it is an adaptation. So, yes, Tom Bombadil is not in it. Whatever. They still
movie didn't need him.
The care and the love that everyone put into this is in every frame. Like every frame. They didn't spare anything. Like if you could put elvish writing on a blade, they would do it, whether you saw it on camera or not.
And like I was telling you guys, even after rewatching it, this movie still holds up. It holds up to some of the best movies still that are out now. Like, I mean, as the effects wise, I didn't see a lot of anything that really bothered me. So,
oh look, I'll tell you, we were talking about this over lunch, right? And the funny thing is, because I rewatched it last night again too, it is crazy to think that movie is over 20 years old now, and the effects, other than I was saying this, we were talking about this over lunch. I said, other than there's a few moments in the film that it didn't even have anything to do with the CGI. It was the compositing. There was a few moments where the compositing was like, okay, so those 6 little guys down there running down the stairs, that's clearly done on a green screen and composite on top of that. Besides a few moments of compositing, like that Balrog looks as good as anything you could produce today. As good as anything you can produce.
Well, they got
today.
the movement down. You know, sometimes they'd make the way everything moved. It was never like, now they might do it faster, but like you said, John, it was the design. Effect shots are only as good as the design of the entire shot.
Yeah.
If the entire shot feels correct, you can sell it. And this movie had that. I mean, they knew everything. It was just so well done.
And you're mentioning forced perspective, right? Remember last night, Ann was watching the movie with me, and I said, I just don't know how they do it. Like I'm watching it, right? And I'm like, I just don't know how they do it. And she says, what do you mean? I said, just to scale, because I'm looking at the scene of like Frodo and Gandalf in Bag End, right? They're in the house. And I'm just like, I just don't know how they do it. And Ann was like, I think I remember them teaching. I said, no, don't get me wrong. From a technical point of view, I know how they did it. I just don't know how they did it. Because even now, 20 years later, let me see if I can find this one image here. I don't know if, just one I had up here a minute ago. Let's bring this up. So this image here, it looks flawless. As you know, as Elrond proclaims, 9 companions, the Fellowship of the Ring, and then it gives this big establishing shot of
bring forth the ring.
Yeah, Frodo.
Frodo.
But as they're all standing there with the humans and the elf behind, and then the dwarf and the hobbits in front, I'm like, this thing is 20 years old. This looks flawless. This looks perfect. Now, of course, today you can tell when they cut from behind and you just had a small actor running around with a cloak on. But still, other than that, the forced perspective done in this is so brilliant. Because even in the beginning, as Gandalf and Bilbo, prior to the birthday party, just walking around talking in the house, you're like, I know how they did it. I just don't know how they did it. It still stands up to me.
And another thing, because they went for that sort of almost storybook fairy tale color, they were able to caress things in matte paintings, the bigatures, they would build giant miniatures, they called bigatures, and they could caress it all together and color correct it to make it feel like it was all Middle Earth. So it's all of a piece. And that was something they couldn't do without the technology they'd created for the film. And it really works. I mean, when you get into Rivendell, you can see how they brighten up just the faces of the elves. They do so many interesting things that just add to the effect that they're creating this fairy tale verisimilitude that works throughout the entire movie.
And one of the things that I love about any movie that uses it is when you put a group together of different, specialties or races or whatever that have to work together. I really like that. I don't know if that's a cliche or whatever, but I really like when that aspect is in a movie So it kind of felt like you're a part of that group in a way.
Yeah, because in this picture you've got human. Now remember, in the lore, wizard is a different race.
Right.
Right? Like wizard is a different
He's one
race.
of the Astari. He's only taken this form.
So you got Gandalf, who is what he is. You got a couple of humans. You got an elf. You got a dwarf, and you got 4 hobbits. All in the working. Now, the one thing I'll say, talking about the beginning of this thing, because eventually we have his 11th birthday party. He leaves and all that kind of stuff. There's 2 kind of problems I have that really comes to light in this early first half of the first act. One is, and I've never been able to reconcile this, Gandalf shows up in the Shire, and Frodo's like, it's wonderful to see you, and blah, blah. So what's going on in the world, blah, blah, blah. They start to ride through town. Children run out, Gandalf, Gandalf, fireworks, Gandalf. Fire off the fireworks. By the way, one of the funniest moments of the movie, the old guy who looks grumpy at him, fireworks go off. He's ha, ha, ha. But the wife looks at the husband. He goes, one of the funniest moments ever. But so, fireworks, Gandalf, great, great. Oh, you've been labeled a disturber of the peace. Well, blah, blah, blah. But then they get to Bag End. And this is where I get a little bit confused, because Bilbo answers the door. And they act like they haven't seen each other since the Lonely Mountain, since the events of the Hobbit. They act like they haven't seen each other in decades. Which says, wow, you haven't aged a day. So like on one hand, they're acting like he comes and goes to the Shire every once in a while. But then on the other hand, Bilbo's acting like he hasn't seen him in decades. And I watched it again last night trying to pick that out to see, is there some little nugget in here that kind of, settles that, but it doesn't. To me, that's an inconsistency in the movie.
Is his memory like depleting at that moment, Bilbo?
No,
is he getting older?
No.
The way I always saw it is that Gandalf is a legend. He's like,
But the
and he
children saw him,
but
knew.
they've grown up hearing all about Gandalf the Wizard, and they probably all knew that he was coming.
How did Frodo know him? Like
Well,
Frodo
I
seems
don't-
to already have a tight relationship with him, right?
Yeah. he does.
And yet, like, but still, then Gandalf shows up and says, "Oh, you have an age a day. Like, you're just noticing that now? How many years has it been since you've been here?" And then the other thing that's a little bit of
By
a
the way,
problem
in the
to me-
books, it's years,
Yes.
decades.
The other thing that's a little bit of a problem is, and this is the one thing that I think in general Peter Jackson didn't do a good job of in this first movie, which is the passage of time. Because, like, for example, from when Gandalf leaves the ring with Frodo, says, keep it secret, keep it safe, and then leaves, if I remember it right, it's like months.
Oh, I think it's a lot longer than
I
that.
mean, it's a long time before he comes back and says his secret is safe. And it literally felt like a day or two passed.
Yeah. I mean, they had to compress the time. It's true, because there's a lot long. Anybody who's familiar with the books knows it's a lot longer than it seems.
So that was one thing. And then sometimes they had to verbally say it. Like sometimes he was like, okay, we're entering Moria now. It's a 4-day journey to the other side. Okay, great. Now we kind of understand what's going on there. But other than that, that is like in a big, broad fantasy film. That's my only problem. That's it. I mean, with a type of movie like this, I could have 100 problems. That's really my biggest problem. And that's it.
Right.
Which I never picked up on anyways, watching
Right.
it, because I never read the books before. So the Hobbit and whatever Gandalf's story. Yeah.
But again, the casting too is so impeccable, because not just Ian McKellen
Well,
and
and they had
Elijah
to make
Wood.
it changing in the casting.
Yeah, they did. I
With
mean,
Boromir, with
Aragorn.
Aragorn.
yeah,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was not. Why am I freezing on?
Viggo Mortensen.
It wasn't. It wasn't.
It's gonna be Stuart Townsend.
It was going to be Stuart Townsend. That's right. And they started shooting with Stuart Townsend. They started shooting the movie with him, if I'm not mistaken. And then Peter Jackson was a few days in, and they're like, "This isn't working. Let's go get that Mortensen guy." And they brought in Viggo Mortensen.
He just didn't like
It just wasn't fit. It wasn't the fit. It wasn't what
character.
Peter Jackson had in his mind for the character. And it's better. Like, I love this. One of my favorite sayings and philosophies for myself is fail fast. That's one of my biggest things in business and work and everything I do. Fail fast. It's like, hey, I'm going to make mistakes. Just recognize the mistake as quickly as you can, and then move on from it. Don't be afraid to move on from it. And Peter Jackson recognized this isn't working. It's not the right fit. And then they switched to Viggo Mortensen, and history was made. Because now, can anybody imagine Strider being played by anybody else other than Viggo Mortensen?
Nope.
Can anybody else say Gondor calls for aid? Sorry, that we're getting ahead of ourselves. That's the next
It's weird seeing Viggo in anything right now without even thinking back. Oh, that's
Aragorn.
Even History of Violence. Watching History of Violence, and I'm thinking it's Aragorn. It's one of
And
the
he's
top
going to
picks.
be in Crimes of the Future.
Yes, he
Yeah.
is. Saw that first trailer about that. So, anyway, let's get some general stuff here. Ray, let me go over to you on this. One of the strengths of Lord of the Rings is all the characters. What character, when the movie's over, did you find like you just find yourself being attached to more? Like, who was your favorite character in this movie?
Obviously, it's Legolas.
Legolas.
Like Legolas. Just because he's mean with that arrow. I mean, you like anybody who could hold their own, but from the beginning, I actually thought my impression of him was, this guy's gonna get us killed. Because he's the skinny, the pretty. He came off as like he's gonna be looking at himself in the mirror and get someone else killed. Because, like I said, I don't know anything about any of the lore, so I had my first impressions. I actually like Gimli a lot.
Oh, I love Gimli.
He was so funny, and I was never worried about him. The whole time I was worried about one of the characters I like dying. But as the movie went on, you see how strong they are, but not only how strong they are, how much stronger they are when they're together, which was like not only did they prove their strength like when they're one-on-ones or whatever, but when they were together, it was like you can't penetrate that rock at all. So anytime they like kind of split up, okay. So to answer your question, it was Legolas, and Gimli was a close second. I mean, I did like all the hobbits. They were cute, but they were sometimes a liability to me.
Sometimes
They were frustrating most of the time. So
especially Pippin. Sometimes.
Yeah,
What about you? Well, I wanted to ask you, like with all these characters, which is the one that really stands out to you?
Well, I think the four hobbits together, because
Right.
they are the unlikeliest of heroes. And I think Merry and Pippin are the MVPs of this movie, even though they're frequently comedy relief. They in a clutch, you can count on them. They're there. And the four of them together, like when they first hit the road and start taking off, and they meet the first of the Nazgul on the path, and they hide
How
underneath the
freaky
tree.
is that shot, by the way? They're hiding on the tree. The Nazgul shows up, and all the insects and worms and spiders start coming out.
I mean, it was, and
So
just
good.
again, the design, Weta Workshop's work in that, with the design of this ancient armor and the how the horse is all like diseased and half dead,
and every time they were around, they played that haunting sound like that,
and
like that.
all of that stuff. But I just and those four characters together, you see they're solidifying underneath that tree. These people are gonna go the distance, and I love how it's heartbreaking when they get split apart later on as we go into the series, and you've got Sam and Frodo have to go off on their own on their journey, and Merry and Pippin go somewhere else. And I think that the group, I love the four of them together, and the casting. I mean,
Yeah.
again, if they were not cast correctly,
Then it doesn't work.
it doesn't work.
I have my favorite characters, but the ones that left the biggest impact on me was Sam.
Oh, Sam.
His dedication to Frodo is like, I would love to have one person in the world that would do that for me.
Oh, I remember thinking to myself, everybody should wish they had a friend like Sam. And
Right.
by the time we get to the end of the trilogy, you use the phrase MVP. Sam is kind of the MVP
Well,
of the
yeah,
trilogy,
he-
right?
yeah, he really
By the time you get to the end there, like, I may not be able to carry it for you, but I can carry you. And I'm like, fuck, that is such a good line,
Well,
man.
and
but I'm getting ahead of ourselves.
A lot of this came out of Tolkien's experience with World War
Yes.
One and
Yeah.
everything. And you had officers, and they're not called servants, but they're called, I forget what they're called, that would attend the officers. I mean, that relationship was right out of the British military, and a lot of what happened, C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, and they knew a lot of people, their contemporaries, had fought in World War One, and a lot of this is born out of what Tolkien was, the industrialization and what was going on in England at the time, and what he had seen, the horrors of war and all that. And he was incorporating it into this story, which is what makes it so resonant, because it all came out of his own experience. And as you move along through the story, John, I love the fact that you meet Gandalf, but then he goes away, and you like these four guys. And when they get to Bree, and they barely escape the Nazgul on the ferry, the Buckleberry ferry, and they get to the prancing pony, and it's so great because then it's like, oh, a little bit of respite. We get a couple of drinks in us. It comes in pints, and then they introduce Aragorn. and he's sitting there in the shadows, you know, and he's smoking his pipe and observing everything. Like, it's like he knows that the game is afoot, and he's just waiting. And I love that whole scene because the hobbits don't know just how malevolent where they are is. The evil, they have left the Shire. There's evil at every corner. There is no escape, but they don't even know it yet. They don't even know how close they are. And in meeting Aragorn, because remember, if they hadn't met him, they would have been sleeping in their beds and they would have been dead.
Well, I mean, again, it showed that Gandalf had foresight to make sure he had a plan B ready and in place in case he got, as he said, delayed. But I wanted to backtrack for a second because I want to give my favorite character of the book. I've mentioned this, or of the movie. I've mentioned this before, but my all-time favorite character, I'm going to see if anybody in the live chat, because I've mentioned this a few times, but I'm going to see if anybody in the live chat knows who it is. The Lord of the Rings contains my all-time favorite character in all of fiction. Not just fantasy, not just books, not just movies. My all-time favorite character in all of stuff. And a few guys already know who it is. Daniel Dang, Tom knows it, Curtis knows it. It's Boromir. Boromir's my all-time favorite character in all of fiction. Because I think in movies like Lord of the Rings, I think one of the powerful things about this movie, and about any movie really, is when we can see a character that we kind of identify with a little bit. And the thing about Boromir, to me, is, number one, he's strong. He wants to do what's right. He wants to have honor. Like, the council decides to do something that he doesn't want to do. And I love the line he says, if this is the will of the council, Gondor will see it done. Like, he's got that. He's got the great intentions, right? But he's also got weakness in him. And he succumbs faster than anybody else in the party to the ring and the temptation of the ring, and actually turns on Frodo, attacks him, tries to take the ring from him. Like, the most horrible thing you could do in this movie, like betray the fellowship, go after Frodo, take the thing. And the thing that makes me love this character so much is that the regret and the shame he has when he realizes what he's done. And the very next thing we see him do is the ultimate, I think, in any movie, TV series, whatever, it's the ultimate act of redemption. As he comes flying out of nowhere, the ring's gone, right? The ring's gone. It's just two hobbits there. It's Merry and Pip. But it doesn't matter. He is going to do whatever he can do to try to save their lives. And he dives in there. One of the most heartbreaking, powerful death scenes to me, as that fucking Uruk-hai sits there and just keeps peppering him with arrow after arrow, and then finally, like, right up in his face, and is about to do it again. But the death of Boromir, the redemption of Boromir, his death, and that great conversation he has with Aragorn before he dies. I would have followed you, my brother, my captain, my king. You know, it's just, because there's just so much in this character that I see in us. And I see that's why I love this character, and that's why he's my favorite.
Well, you know, and in the extended edition of Fellowship, my favorite addition to that is the Boromir conversation with Aragorn outside the mines of Moria, where he's making his case to Aragorn, like, look, there is good in the world of men. You know, you need to jump in and be a part of this, and you need to believe in men. And Aragorn doesn't really, and he's trying to convince him of this, and it's a great exchange. And I think you're right. I mean, the character is tragic, and yet what a great redemption at the end, and it serves as the ending of this movie, really. You know, it's that kind of sacrifice, and you realize what's at stake and what it all means.
And they didn't even end up killing the two. which really sucks, you know.
So we get past the prancing pony now. They find out what's gone. By the way, let's talk just for a second about, speaking of great redemption, the great betrayal. Saruman, the White, as like, damn, that Christopher Lee. Never turn your back on Christopher Lee. Gandalf goes to see him. He goes, you're the head of my order. And like, who does Gandalf bow to, right? He gets there and he says, Saruman. And like, whatever, there's this reverence. He is wise and powerful. He'll know what to do. Get there, the great betrayal. And of course, you know, instead of killing him, he puts him up on the roof, which of course brings up one of the great memes of Lord of the Rings, which is Saruman takes Gandalf, puts him up on the roof so he can't get away anywhere. Ultimately, Gandalf just calls for the giant eagle to come and get him, which begs the question, Why didn't they just take those giant eagles to Mordor and drop the ring from a bird down into the volcano? Fabulous question, never been answered, but that's fine. Then we don't have a story. But anyway, yeah.
Do you know the rates on those birds?
Very expensive.
They might, you know what? They might not have gone into Mordor. You know, they only went
True.
into Mordor after the ring was destroyed.
Yep. I mean, that could be true. There could be something to that as well. But just that whole scene and then talking about, what are the seeing eye stones called again? The Palanthea?
The Palantirs.
Palantirs?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought he referred to it as the Palanthea. But anyway, the Palanthea stones. Whatever. That whole thing about that, and then realizing that was his personal bat phone to Sauron. Oh, I mean, you could feel the betrayal and all that kind of stuff. That whole thing, and then setting up Isengard, right? That, and then of course you've got J.R. Tolkien setting up the whole idea of the industrialized world versus the natural world as J.R. starts tearing all the trees down, and that comes back to bite them in the ass later in the films because obviously the Ents ain't too happy about that.
No.
So that sets up everything too. But oh my God, and then the creation of the Uruk-hai. Crossing, what did they say? It was a cross of orcs with goblins.
Yeah.
Right? So what do? Just kill two of them, mix them together, bury them, and then let them come up. I don't know how he did it. But anyway, the Uruk-hai were some badass dudes. That was great.
Yeah, and then, you know, when the Nazgul corner them on the top of Weathertop and Frodo gets stabbed, you know, that's terrifying too. And these characters, they never have it easy in this movie. I mean, it's never, it just gets more dire as the movie goes on.
The cave trolls.
Oh, dude, one of the best lines in the movie. We were talking about this at lunch. One of my favorite lines in the movie, and it's the sarcasm and the resign and the whatever that he says it. Boromir peeks out the door, the arrow's sitting, he comes back and closes the door, goes, they have a cave troll. One of my favorite lines in the entire movie. I don't know why.
But man, the fight they put up in that small room was awesome.
Oh,
I thought
it was
that whole
so good.
That whole thing. I remember they made a Lord of the Rings video game.
Yep.
That was straight up linear to. I mean, everything you did in the game happened in the movie. But when I got to play that part, I think it was 2-player. I think me and Ann were playing it. I would always play Legolas, and then she would play Gimli. And we would just do that level over and over again because we couldn't beat that troll. That whole thing was really cool. But also, in a way, did any of you guys think Gandalf was kind of like a dick sometimes?
Oh yeah, yeah. He's short. He's gruff.
He's really grumpy.
I mean,
He,
like when poor Pip.
Yeah, he scolds Pip like a
little bitch, yeah. When Pip accidentally knocks, first of all, how awesome was that? Just first the one thing goes down, then the chain goes down, then it pulls the suit of armor down, which then pulls the bucket down, and it was pretty harsh what Gandalf said. Next time, throw yourself in and rid us of your stupidity, fool of a took.
So
Like,
good.
oh, poor Pip.
And then how great was that? Once then you wait, you hear the echo,
oh yeah, then the drums,
and then the
boom, boom. It's like, oh damn.
And they came. But even before that, the octopus creature.
Oh yeah, that
That was
Kraken.
the Watcher.
The
Yeah.
That was
Kraken
really
out
cool
there.
too. I mean, this was stuff that was blowing my mind when I saw it in the theater. I was like, "Oh my God, there's so many things that are trying to kill them."
Yeah, everything
Right?
everywhere is trying to kill them. And then they finally, they fight their way out of the one thing. They're running through the mines, and then you just see the hordes of orcs and goblins and like when they start crawling down the pillars. Like, oh, that just gives you the heebie-jeebies. And then they get surrounded. And here's the funny thing too, when you think about it. The hero really of the Lord of the Rings story overall is the Balrog. Because our heroes are down in the mines of Moria. They are literally completely surrounded by thousands of orcs. They would have died right then and there if the Balrog hasn't showed up, and they were like, oh shit, we gotta go. And they all leave. And thanks to that Balrog, the Fellowship of the Ring survived.
As soon as they went on their journey, I didn't feel safe anywhere. Even when they went to stop and rest, I didn't feel safe at all because it was either creatures, other people, or the environment trying to kill them. It was everything.
Yes,
that's
the environment was trying to kill
you know, it was like you can't rest. Just go. That's the way I felt throughout the whole movie. Go.
And how
No rest.
frustrating was it when you're with them and they're journeying and they're resting on the rocks, and then all the bird spies come and they realize, all right, they've been traveling for a month. And they're like, oh, we can't go this way. Guess we got to hike up the snow mountain. Oh, that sounds like fun. And then who knows how long it took them to get up in the snow mountain. And then they get buried and they're like, well, this didn't work. Now we got to turn around and go back. And we got to go try to go mine. And then we get in the mines. It's like, oh, look, orcs. And it's not a mine, it's a tomb. And they're like, they were just getting effed
Everywhere.
every step.
It was the ultimate adventure. It's the ultimate
so
adventure
good.
movie. I mean, all I could think of was this needs to be a video game, like throughout the whole thing, because I was like, 9 players, 9-player multiplayer action, trying to get through it. The whole thing was an adventure to me. Like,
You know,
it was great.
they had the first trailer for this that they showed in theaters was for all 3 movies. They talked about it's like an announcement trailer. And then at the end of the trailer, they show all the members of the Fellowship come over the top of the mountain. You remember that shot where they
Yeah,
all
yeah.
pass by? And I remember thinking, oh man, I mean, it nailed the look because of the great work that Weta Workshop had done. Everybody looks different. You know, Boromir is a man of Gondor, and Legolas is he's a woodland elf, and they all look different, and the hobbits look the same, you know, and it's so the beautiful costume work and the beautiful
Exactly.
the way they made these characters look, they were so iconic. And when you see them all together, you feel like you're watching like a strike team. Is your strike team ready?
Exactly, strike team.
You know, that's
exactly
what, and they certainly went through the shit. They had to go through the shit.
Oh, they absolutely did. And then, I mean, we were talking a little bit earlier, like if you were uninitiated in the novels and the books and the movie ends, a lot of people are like, well, WTF? Like, that's the end of this movie? Because they didn't know. The death of Gandalf. The death of Gandalf. Fly, you fools. Oh, first of all, one of the greatest lines in all of movies. You shall not pass. Like, okay, you are the ultimate badass. He's sitting there telling what's up to the Balrog, right? He's like, listen, you're my bitch. You will not pass. And then he like cronks him down. Of course, the whip comes up, gets him. And then we see what happens in the next movie. But still, for those who are uninitiated in it,
Yep, like me.
the Gandalf dies. And they sell it, man. And the pain, and I love after they all get out and everybody's grieving and Aragorn comes out. All right, Sam, up, everybody up. We got to get going, blah, blah, blah. And Boromir's like, for pity's sake, give them a moment. But Aragorn's forever the pragmatist. He goes, listen, as soon as that sun goes down, these hills are filled with orcs. We've got to get to the forest. We got to go. But just the pain, whatever. And even once they get into the forest realm of
Rivendell.
No, not Rivendell. It's Galadriel's realm. Once they get into the forest realm, and they're hanging out, and they hear it's like Legolas it's a song, it's a lament for Gandalf. Like even the elves are singing a song of sadness for the past. Oh, it felt so.
What a beautiful area that was.
Oh,
Well,
it's
yeah, we didn't talk
gorgeous.
about like Rivendell when they have the Council of Elrond, you know, and everybody's together and
Bring forth the ring,
yeah.
Mr. Smith. Yeah, that kind of.
It was the way the elves are depicted in that realm is depicted, and again, Hugo Weaving as Elrond is so awesome, you know, and that's what we kind of skipped it over, but that's when they put this fellowship together.
By the way, a
is
couple
in
of
this
uses
council.
reminded the name of that the woodland realm was Lothlorien. So,
Yeah,
thank
Lothlorien. But we, you know, when he's stabbed and all that, when they get to Rivendell and you meet Elrond, I mean, Hugo Weaving as Elrond was a badass too. Like, you know, you're meeting all these people and it's incredible. And I love that. And then when you get to Lothlorien, of course, the gift of Galadriel, you meet Lady Galadriel, and again, you know, and she gives everybody their gifts. And or is that in the extended version? The gift of Galadriel.
No, they all get their gifts. Yeah. Then later on, they go off.
That's what I like. I said, I'm going to repeat it again. I enjoyed the most out of this movie how every place felt like it was so much further from the place they were before. I kind of felt the distance when they would change to each environment. Like it felt like they were in another completely different area, and I love that about the movie.
Yeah, I mean, you get a real sense of they are on a very long journey.
And the shots, the cinematic shots overhead, where you see the scope of the land.
Oh, it was awesome.
Those were beautiful. Like that's why that cliffhanger hurt so much, because they gave you a view of where they had to go, and I wanted to go there already. Like, let's go.
Well, that's another thing that I don't think this movie would have been what it was if they didn't make it New Zealand, because they had so many on the North and South Island of New Zealand. There's so many different terrains. You can go skiing on the South Island. You can go. They've got beautiful, almost tropical forests, and they made such good use of all the land and those beautiful mountains. And I mean, is there any other place in the world that looked like this? And New Zealand was absolutely a standout location, and they maximized it to give you a sense of you're in an alien environment.
I want to go back though for a second to Galadriel, because a couple things. Obviously, she's the opening narrator of this whole thing. We find out right from the beginning she's one of the recipients of the rings initially. Then she's got like the ultimate cheat on your husband power. Like, she's greeting everybody, but she's having side conversations with, yo, Aragorn, meet me in my elven loft later. No, but she's having a conversation with Frodo mentally. But some people, I remember to this day, don't like the portrayal of Galadriel. Like, especially when he gets to that point when Frodo offers her the ring. Because this is the second time that Frodo's tried to give the ring away to somebody he thinks can take care of it. And obviously when he did it with Gandalf, it was no, like, understand, I would accept this ring. I desire the ring I would take it out of a desire to do good, but through me, it would wreak unspeakable evil, or whatever the line he said. And then the same kind of thing happens, only in a more dramatic way, when he tries to give the ring to Galadriel. He says to her, like, what did he say? He goes, if you wish, I would offer you the ring. I would give you the ring. And then she gives this whole speech about one of my favorite lines in the movie, when she says, like, instead of a Dark Lord, you would have a Dark Queen, and the lighting and her eyes and all that kind of stuff. And then she says, like, the line, I actually fired this out on Twitter last night when she said in the movie, this line, all will love me and despair. Damn. That line is, that reminds me of half my girlfriends. All will love me and despair.
That's the only part I said for me didn't hold up. Where she turns into
I love it.
That scared the crap out of me, like, when I first watched it. But last night I was like, after messing around with Photoshop for a while, the layer, the blending, and, like, it just wasn't as scary as it was before.
By the way,
the invert.
Gotta say something here. Brandon Reed in the live chat is saying, well, I guess Ezra Miller has the ring now. Driving the
But also, when Galadriel does that, she's kind of making a point.
Yes. Oh, no, she absolutely is.
She's, she wants to make sure that in a way, like, you got to understand where we're at here, pal.
One of the most beautiful shots is when they're on those boats going in between the...
Oh, when you had the giant statue.
Yes.
The Argonath. That's the
That
Argonath.
had to be one of the prettiest shots of the movie, for me, at least.
I had a poster for a long time of just a wide shot. You see the tiny little boat in the river and the two giant statues.
Oh, and when they sent Boromir over the falls.
Yeah.
That was a night. That was like, that was kind of, that hurt a little bit.
Oh, and like Aragorn, like, I know we're jumping around all over the place here, but when Aragorn, he's saying goodbye to him, and I can't remember the line he says before that, but he says something, son of Gondor. It's like, the poetry, the beauty of it. It's like modern language Shakespeare is what Tolkien was writing at the time. It was just, oh, man.
I think, too, one of the things about this movie that I'm always struck by when I go back and watch it again is the tone. There's a lot of disparate elements here. The hobbits are kind of goofy. Boromir, like you said, is ultimately a tragic hero. Aragorn's serious. You've got elves. Then you have Gimli, who's always there for comedy relief and is kind of funny. There's all these elements, all these balls that Peter Jackson's keeping up in the air. And the tone of this movie could have veered off at any moment and unbalanced the film. But I think that one of the great marvels of all three of these movies is Peter Jackson knows what kind of a tone this movie has to have in it. It never gets too self-important, and it never spins off to total fantasy land where you can no longer believe in it. And that's a really, really hard thing to do. And over three movies, because, you know, on one hand, Sam and Frodo have this drudgery through Middle Earth, but then you've got guys going off into battle, and then you've got other people. You've got Gandalf's story, and it's a really, really hard thing to do. And this movie, I can't think of any other movie that keeps its tone the way this movie does, and that's why people love it so much.
By the way, a great moment of this film that I should point out that Devin in the live chat just put in there, because I remember it got, even though I knew it was coming, it got me. There's just a quick moment, maybe some would consider it a cheap jump scare, but when Frodo is reunited with Bilbo in Rivendell, and then Bilbo's like, "Oh, my old ring. I would very much to hold it one last time." And then he goes, "Ah!" And just for a second, they CG his face, dark, very Gollum-ish, the teeth and the eyes. Man, I knew it was coming. Like, I know that's what happens in this moment, but it happens in the moment, and it makes you jump. I mean, that was just a terrific low. And it really showed how fast he started aging after losing the ring. And then later, of course, at the end of the trilogy, as they're getting into the boats to travel with the elves, like, he's much, much older at that point.
Oh, yeah.
Which also tells you how much time is passing in this story. Where do we go to next? What do we cover next here? Talking about this movie, we're talking about them passing through through the statues. We talked about. I mean, we could just talk about this.
I mean, we could go to where where I'm going to the end already, where they split up.
Sure.
The decision to get to Pip, to go after Pip,
Merry and Pip,
and Merry and Pip to save them, was. It was like, who do I follow? Like, which path am I going to follow? So it was kind of, it's a great setup for the next movie.
Well, it's also,
it pissed me off. But
it's also fulfillment, really, because it wasn't just encouraging words. When they're in Lothlorien, they're talking to Galadriel, and she's speaking to them, but hope still remains as long as the fellowship is true. She wasn't just giving them a pet talk. It was almost prophetic, right? So when Frodo makes the decision, encouraged by Galadriel, that he can't stay with, like, eventually the ring will overtake everyone in the fellowship.
Yeah.
He's got to go out on his own. Leading to one of the best lines ever. "I'm going to Mordor alone. Of course you are. And I'm coming with you." One of the great lines ever. But so he goes off. So there's a moment there, right? So Gimli says, well, then that's it. The fellowship has failed. And then hearkening back to what Galadriel says early in the film, Aragorn comes up, puts his hand on both Legolas's shoulder and Gimli's shoulder, says, "Not as long as we remain true to each other." Okay, so Frodo had to go, fine. The fellowship stays true. Merry and Pippin are in trouble. Let's go hunt some orc. By the way, I remember the first time I saw this movie, the audience audibly cheered when Aragorn said, "Let's hunt orc."
Yes.
And everybody's like, "Yeah!" You hear in the theater, everything. And then they start, by the way, in Middle Earth, when you're going somewhere, everybody runs. You just run all day.
Poor Gimli.
Anybody is running too. He's like with a short
He's
little,
trying.
very dangerous over short distances.
Yeah.
But it was, again, almost prophetic when he says, we're going to stay true. So, and that becomes incredibly important later on in the series because they stayed true and because they went after Merry and Pippin. Ultimately, that's why they were able to win the day.
Yeah.
And it's a damn perfect movie.
And I keep going back to Philippa Fran and Peter. You know, Philippa and Fran wrote it with Peter. His direction and his orchestration of all of these elements, because he knows exactly when to give the audience cathartic moments. Like you brought up lines, you know, "Let's go hunt some orc." He's very aware that those are audience cheering moments. And he's also very aware that when you're watching a movie like this, the audience, at 3 hours long almost, the audience needs these moments. They need this cathartic release. And whether or not it's old friends being reunited, whether it's Cate Blanchett doing and despair, you know, giving us this movie is beautifully orchestrated, and there's a reason why.
Orchestrated.
Yes, it's beautifully orchestrated.
I see what you did there.
But and I think that there's no amount of praise that can be heaped on this movie enough to say that this is an incredible feat of storytelling that could have gone wrong on so many levels, but doesn't.
Yep.
All right, guys. Well, listen, there are obviously many moments we have just skipped over and not talked about, but we could talk about this movie all day, all week. We could talk about this movie. We could do a 5-part series.
Well, sound the first day, sound, the colors the next day,
Visual effects.
I can't
visual
believe that in
characters.
November of this year, this movie's old enough to drink.
It's true. It can have a pint.
It can have a pint.
It can have its own pint.
They
But
come in-
we're
come-
going to spend the rest of our time now hearing from you guys. Now, the super chats are no longer open because it filled up. But we are now going to hear from you guys for all you guys who sent in super chats. So let's go over and see what you guys have to talk about for our movie this week, Fellowship of the Ring. We're going to start things off here with Mega Movies, who wrote, I know it's cheating, but I don't care. I do what you do with Star Wars, John. The Lord of the Rings trilogy pretty much combined as my favorite movie of all time. Yeah, listen, I do that with Star Wars. Like when people ask me about my favorite movies of all time, when I mention Star Wars, I mean that as the original trilogy. I just kind of count that. Nobody else has to do that. I'm saying I just do that for myself. But also when I do my favorite movies of all time list, I also count the Lord of the Rings trilogy as one thing. I just put it into one spot.
You should.
Yeah, I mean, nobody else has to do that. I'm just saying that's the way I like to do it. So, all right, next up, Mega Movies also writes, the Lord of the Rings trilogy is what shaped my love for cinema. Every single year, it becomes tradition with my mom to watch these films. I can't believe it turns 21. But it's true. I prefer the Star Wars movies, but there is no other movies, including Star Wars, that I will watch almost as an annual thing. I need to sit down and rewatch the Lord of the Rings trilogy. There's something so epic about it in scope, as you were pointing out, Rob, in tone. I don't know that there's other movies that I mentally make note that every year I need to try to watch these.
I'm telling this. That's a beautiful thing that you and your mom actually watch these every year.
That is great.
If my dad loved movies as much as the type of movies I did, I would have the same thing when he was still here. So.
By the way, one of the lemonade that came out of lemons about the pandemic, for film fans, one of the minor bright spots and all that was, I remember a lot of people, because they re-released Lord of the Rings in a lot of theaters when there was no other movies coming out. And I remember, Rob, a lot of people writing into us saying, you know what, I've never seen Lord of the Rings before. I went to go watch it. It was that and The Godfather, right? It was The Godfather. A lot of people had never seen The Godfather. They were re-releasing The Godfather in theaters. A lot of people had never seen Lord of the Rings, and they were going to go see Lord of the Rings. I mean, that is one of the cool things. All right. Next up, we got Phoenix King Theo writes, for me, these have, without question, the best scores of movie history. How the themes evolve through the 3 films is something I haven't seen elsewhere. I'll tell you what about that. I will sometimes, when I want to say it's the weekend and I want to take a nap in the afternoon or something like that, something I never get to do during the day. But I love putting on, I find that there's a couple of YouTube channels that are just 6 hours of Lord of the Rings music with background sounds like a breeze, leaves bristling, and every single piece of music for Lord of the Rings, when it starts to play, those moments play in my head immediately. That speaks to the power of the music in these things. Like whenever I just see a grassy hill, I hear ba-da-bum, bum, 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 ba-da, bum, 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 right? I just hear that in my head instinctually. And when I hear that music, I see that in my head. I mean, it's crazy. What Howard Shore did with the music in this movie is incredible. Where do you rank it, Rob, when you think about it?
Dude, it's right up there with the greatest scores ever written, because it's not just, it's the themes. There's so many different themes in this movie, whether it's the dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun, the orc theme, and there's so many different kinds of themes throughout, and the elves or Lothlorien, the music in Lothlorien, it's just so, and then there's of course action scoring and the battle music. There's so much great music in this. It's just an incredible feat.
The whole sound design of the movie was just well done.
Oh,
yeah.
Not even just a score, just everything else too.
I mean, the forging when metal is clanking on other metal, when the orcs are forging. I mean, it's just incredible.
All right. Next up, we got K Major, who writes, here begins the tradition of second breakfast and 11sies and lunch and then whatever else came after that. I love second
Dinner,
breakfast.
supper.
Oh yeah, was that when Pip was talking?
Yeah.
He's like, he doesn't know about second
I don't
breakfast?
think he knows about second breakfast, Pip. What about elevensies? It is seriously, Second Breakfast is awesome. K Major also writes, here begins, same thing. Then he also writes, the score of this movie is next level. Absolutely. We're just talking about that. K Major, the score all the way through. And I know I'm jumping ahead and we'll talk about this in a couple of weeks. But as Return of the King ends and the ships are sailing off into the west, and then Annie Lennox sings Into
and you
the
hear
West.
Doo-doo.
That song,
Lay down.
I think it might be my all-time favorite Oscar moment, was Annie Lennox on stage singing Into the West. Because she sings that song, which is, first of all, one of the most beautiful songs, and it's perfect for this trilogy. And the way it ends, as the elves and Frodo and Gandalf, and they all sail off into the West. And that song plays. And I remember, too, as that song is playing at the end, they do all those brown parchment paper sketches of different scenes, revisiting the journey we've just been on. And that song, with those images, I was spent when it was done. Like, just spent.
And when she belts it out, you know, because that song builds. I mean, come on.
I gotta say something. Hold on before we go on. After watching this movie, I have a tub in the garage with all these Lord of the Rings figures that I collected that I was trying to sell off for the longest time, like a couple of years ago, that I said, man, I can't sell these. Like, I just couldn't. No one would buy them. I'm so happy I still have them. I'm going to open them all up later because Frodo comes with a little ring, too.
Oh, yeah.
So I can't wait to look at those later.
All right. Next up, we go to David Sock and Lotion writes. Hey, guys. Love your show. Thank you so much, David. Watch every day. Should I buy the theater version or extended trilogy to add to my collection? Thanks. Oh, and of course, Bring on the Filthy. Well, you're gonna get two different points of view here. To me, if you only can have one, you get the theatrical version. That's the version of the movie. That's the movie that everybody knows. That's the movie that everybody saw together. I like the extended stuff. I get a big kick out of the extended stuff. Actually, further you go into the trilogy, the more I like the extended stuff. But if you want to have that shared experience that everybody had when they first went to the theaters and watched this in the movie that 99% of the people know, I say get the theatrical version. Now for the counterpoint. Rob.
Look, I think obviously they knew that there was going to be two different versions of this movie because Peter Jackson had to contractually deliver films of a certain length. And the compromise that they made was New Line said, okay, well, we'll release the extended versions, which Peter Jackson wanted to do. So in my mind, I think the extended versions are a much richer experience. And when you're watching them, it deepens your understanding of the characters. There's moments that I think illuminate the rest of the movie, like that Boromir Aragorn scene. And I think that it's just a more satisfying and more rich experience with the extended version.
Wait a second. The extended was like the edition that was released later, right?
Yeah.
And they didn't include the original in each of those discs? It's
No.
just the extended? You don't have enough? That's crazy to me.
There should be a way on those discs you'd think to be able to, if you play this, it'll play the version and knew how to skip over the extra bonus.
Well, I mean, when they
You'd think
first
they
did
would've
it,
been
they
able to
had to
do that.
release them on separate discs. They were in two parts. And the one thing that New Line did was they announced way in advance, they said, look, we're going to release the theatrical versions. And then 6 months later, we're going to release, or whatever, however long it was, we are going to release the extended edition. So they were upfront about this. It was not a double dip.
And they never released an ultimate edition with both?
They
Okay,
have.
so get that one.
Yeah, I mean, I would say get that one because there is some wonderful stuff in the extended version. Again, my philosophy is, but that's not the actual movie. That's not.
Well, that was not the theatrically released version.
But if you can get one of those ultimate editions where you can get the best of both worlds, because I would say this too, tell me if you agree with this, Rob, you can't actually really appreciate the extended version until you've watched the original version. Like, it's watching the original version, and then when you go later and watch the extended version, and this new material comes that you've never seen before in there,
true.
it's kind of got a nice special impact.
Yeah, I mean, I would just think that for me, I've only watched the theatrical versions once, and then I've only ever watched the extended edition. So, because when we were working on the special features, so it was the extended edition.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes
and I never went back and watched the theatricals
that
again.
totally makes sense.
Okay, next up, we go to Orange Hand, who writes, there are tons of great stories on the special features of how certain elements of the film came to be. Are there any that are your favorites? Rob, as somebody who worked on the special features, you got a favorite story?
God, no, there's I can't even begin to tell you I mean, there's, like our viewer said, there's so many stories. I mean, I can't even pick out just one, but I did like the fact that Viggo Mortensen went out and like tried to be Aragorn for real. Like, he went out into the New Zealand outback or whatever and lived out there.
Very method.
He went out and camped, and he really wanted to get into the mindset of it all. And I really liked that he did that. I mean, I thought
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and because he wanted to get a feel for it. And that brought the authenticity to it. But there's so many. Christopher Lee was a huge Tolkien fan, loved Tolkien, and he wanted to play Gandalf, but even he realized that he was too old. I believe
out of everybody in the movie, Christopher Lee is the only person who actually met Tolkien.
Yeah.
He's the only guy in Lord of the Rings who actually met Tolkien.
Yeah, and Christopher Lee spoke so many different languages and was in British intelligence during the war. And I think my favorite story, and it's been recounted, is in Return of the King, when Grima stabs. Christopher Lee had to explain to Peter Jackson, that's not what it sounds like when somebody gets killed with a knife. And Christopher Lee's just like, let me explain to you how this doesn't work. And because the insinuation is that Christopher Lee killed dudes during World War II and knew exactly how it sounded. So that's a good one, too.
All right. Next up, we've got CJ Rebirth writes, first saw this around the age of 7 or 8. The One Rings theme gives me chills every time. Yeah, it absolutely does. I hear it also. Kid me was like, wow, when I first saw Eve Lily, probably mean Evangeline Lilly as, I meant Liv Tyler as Arwen. I'm now 27, and I love that it still holds up. It is, again, we've already talked about this a little bit earlier, but it is remarkable how well this movie holds up. Other than, again, a couple of compositing shots, some compositing issues, which I'm sure they could totally easily fix in a new re-release of the movie if they wanted to.
I think they have for the 4K version. They've gone back.
They went back and cleaned that up. Other than that, it's absolutely flawless. It's absolutely perfect, man. All right, next up. Kurt Unconscious writes, I made a promise, Mr. Frodo. Don't you leave him, Samwise Gamgee, and I don't mean to. John, thank you for doing a movie club of my favorite movie. Again, obviously Sam is great in this, and everybody, here's the sad part about humanity, though. Everybody wants a Sam. Not everybody wants to be a Sam, though.
Right.
That should be our goal, right? There's a life lesson for you. Have a Sam in your life, but be a Sam for somebody else.
Way to go, John.
I like that.
I hope that's what we all do. Anyway, yeah, and listen, and obviously as the trilogy progresses, I mean, like we said, Sam kind of becomes more and more like the MVP of this whole thing. So it is great. It's a wonderful line. I don't mean to, Mr. Frodo. I don't mean to.
He's such the shoulder to lean on or cry on whenever you need it the most. It seems like he's there to push Frodo every time he doubts. Any doubt, Sam is there to pick him up. You know what I mean? That's great. It's like they're one person.
All right. Next up, we've got Noah Schiefer writes, my all-time favorite comfort movie never fails to wow me. And listen, comfort movie or not, you're going to find a lot of film fans in the world that will just say The Lord of the Rings is their favorite film of all time. And maybe even specifically The Fellowship of the Ring. So you're in good company there, Noah. All right, next up, Jared Vester writes, is it cheating to consider all 3 movies of Lord of the Rings as one? I don't. Nope. On my top 10 list of best movies, it's always hard to pick my favorite. Okay, let me clarify how I do it. I do not consider them one movie. But when constructing my favorite movies of all time list, I will just create one spot for the Lord of the Rings, much like I do for the Star Wars films. Because they're 1A and 1B to me. Not like, say, Matrix, which you got to break those up because the quality difference in them is so vast. Or Godfather, because the quality difference once you get to the third one is so vast. But they're just all so great. It's not cheating at all, man. Not cheating at all. All right, next up. Ahmed El Hassan writes, that chase scene with the Ring Wraith and Arwen. Oh, dude. Every moment of this movie is so great, but the moment that she's got Frodo on her horse and she's making haste, and then you start to see the Nazgul closing in and all that kind of stuff. And then the line, like if there's a girl that Aragorn, heir to the throne of Gondor, maybe the biggest badass in Middle Earth, will swoon over, it's going to be a girl who will look at ring wraiths in the face and say, you want them? Come and claim them. Bang! Right there. Elven balls, man. Like that's the woman that Aragorn would fall in love with. Oh my goodness, yes. I totally forgot.
Speaking of balls.
Speaking of balls. No, not really. We need to take just a quick break here. We'll get back to the rest of the questions here in just a moment. But we need to hear a little bit of something here from our folks, our good folks, over at Honey. Check this out. Today's episode of Movie Club is sponsored by Honey, the easy way to save when shopping on your iPhone or computer. Guys, more and more we enjoy shopping online, whether it's on our phones or our computers. And how many times have you gotten to the checkout and seen that promo code box and thought, man, if I only had a promo code, I could save some money? Well, thanks to Honey, manually searching for coupon codes is a thing of the past. Honey is the free shopping tool that scours the internet for promo codes and applies the best one it finds to your cart. So here's the situation. You're shopping online on one of your favorite sites, and when you go to checkout, the Honey button appears, and all you have to do is click Apply Coupons. Then just wait a few seconds as Honey works its magic and searches for coupons it can find for that site that you're on, and if Honey finds a working coupon, just watch the price drop. Recently, Ann and I were hanging out at home one evening and we decided to order in, and the Honey button appeared. I was able to apply a coupon and I actually saved like $6 or $7. It was that easy to use. And Honey doesn't just work on your desktop computer, it also works on your iPhone. Just activate it on Safari on your phone and save on the go. So if you don't already have Honey, you could be straight up missing out. And by getting it, you'll be doing yourself a solid and supporting this show. Get Honey for free at joinhoney.com/movie club. That's joinhoney.com/movie club. All right, and a special thank you to the good folks at Honey for sponsoring this episode of Movie Club. Make sure you guys go get it and use that Movie Club code. All right, let's keep on going with your questions here. Next up, City of Swift writes, this trilogy will always have a special place in my heart as I go through life. I keep going back to them for the journey through life that they are. Though happy and sad times, it always hits the spot. I mean, that's the thing about this movie. This is a movie that I like the way she said it. It goes with you on the journey. Like you could be in a hard place in your life. Like I've had times, years where I was in a hard place in my life and watched Lord of the Rings, and it gave me inspiration. I've been in great places in my life and watched it, and it celebrated life with me. I mean, that's just something these movies do. There's something to learn and aspire to be. You know what? It's the great thing about art. Art will make you imagine and dream and want to make you want to better yourself too. Like, because when you see things like Arwen saying, you want him, you come and claim him. When you see the redemption of Boromir, when you see the faithfulness of a Samwise, when you see the bravery of, you name the character in there, like it's also a movie that inspires you to be the best version of you. And that's what a truly great movie does. So, I mean, I absolutely love that City of Swift. And I think you're absolutely right about that. It goes along with us on the journey. All right, next up, Jared Vester writes, rewatching this movie, I felt sorry for Boromir and what the ring did to him when he tried to take it from Frodo. Again, that's why Boromir to me is my favorite character in all of fiction, whether it's books, movies, comics. Boromir is my favorite guy because I see myself, and I think I see a lot of us in him. Wants to do right, tries to do right, has weaknesses like anybody others. He fails in his weaknesses just like all of us do, but then immediately tries to make good on his failure. And that's something, again, like I was just talking about, these characters, they inspire me. And when I look at Boromir, that always inspires me. It's like, look, I'm going to F up. Despite my best intentions, I'm going to F up. The question is, when I do F up, what do I do after that? And I want to be like Boromir. Pick up my sword, go save Merry and Pip, which he also failed in, and he died. But the important part is that he died nobly. He died trying to make up for his mistake and his weakness, and I just love that about him. All right, next up, Ahmed El Hassan also writes, one of the best openings to a film of all time, in my opinion. Again, the prologue. It's like how much Peter Jackson covered 2 movies worth of material in like just a couple of minutes, set everything all up, and away we go. It was great because once the movie started, you felt everything, you knew everything you needed to know. It was fantastic. All right, K Major writes, how powerful was it to see Aragorn have his sword ready when Boromir had the ring? He was ready to take him out if he had to. Yeah, that was a strong moment. As Boromir says, oh, whatever, I care not. I rubs Frodo's head. And then that camera shot, beautiful choice of shots, by the way. Just a quick camera shot down to Aragorn was holding that sword. I mean, that was like, okay, now you get the sense of how tense everything is.
I love the shot in the snow when Boromir holds up the ring in the
yeah.
It's such a great the focus and it's just such a great moment.
Just overall, we haven't talked a lot about the cinematography of this movie.
Yeah.
And it won best cinematography at the Academy Awards.
Yeah, I mean the great Andrew Lesney who shot it, who's no longer with us. I mean, they did such a great job and of doing this. And then of course he was working with the color graders as well to make this look the way it looked. I mean, they did such a marvelous job.
They really did. All right. Next up. Where are we at near? Okay, yeah. Sidious writes, the shot of Frodo's hand reaching for Sam's hand in the river could have been a painting, and I'd believe it. Looks unbelievably real. Here's the one thing, though. None of the underwater stuff looked the way it would look. I mean, none of that was shot underwater, right? None of that. It was kind of also like the way they did the dark, like when they're in the caves of Moria and Gandalf takes his staff and goes and lights up. That's actually, they're shooting that in a fully lit room. They just used post-production to make it feel like the room was dark. And then it was that underwater stuff was not actually shot underwater, but the style of it just worked for the storytelling of it, right? Like it just absolutely, and then when that hand went in the water and grabbed Sam's hand, that was awesome. All right, next up, Jared Vester writes, also completely speculative, but if the surviving fellowship had stayed with Frodo and Sam, do you guys believe they would have failed at the destroying of the ring, or could you see them succeeding? They absolutely would have failed, because the ring would have done to every single one of them that it did to Boromir. It would have done it to all of them, and it would have destroyed. That's why Frodo knew he had to leave. Rob, what do you think?
Oh, I completely agree that he did. That's what made him leave. You know, he had to leave because he saw the corruption of a good man, and he couldn't risk it. You know, he couldn't risk it. And look what they did. Look, when Sam and Frodo light off on their own, look at the risk that they've taken.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they're going off without. They've got no protection. They just have what Galadriel gave them.
All right, next up, K Major writes, the score in this movie is almost a character to me. Now, again, we've gone over the score many times, dude, and you're absolutely right. The score of this film is one of, arguably to some people, the best out of any movie ever of all time. It is certainly in the conversation for that. K Major also writes, I'll never forget watching this movie when I was 10 on DVD. Saw the rest of the trilogy in theaters. I know the lines by heart, so many quotes. And I think that's true of a lot of us fans. I think for a lot of us, we don't even realize how many times we've watched this movie.
Oh,
because we can just recite right along with the movie as it goes.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I know Ray can't, but like easy. No.
But when we do the Two Towers next week, man, I can't wait to tell you guys where I was at and what, just the whole story. It's gonna be crazy.
By the way, I should mention we will not be doing Two Towers next week.
Oh, my bad.
Because we're not doing a movie club next week. Next week,
CinemaCon.
we are going to be at CinemaCon. So the next movie club will be in 2 weeks, and that is when we'll pick up with the Two Towers.
I'm very much looking forward. Do you know what we're going to be seeing next Thursday, John?
We're going to be seeing Top Gun next Thursday.
Oh, yes, we are.
We're going to be seeing a lot of stuff at CinemaCon this year. I'm so freaking excited for it.
Which will be the prequel to Lord of the Rings, Top Gun Maverick.
Yes. It leads directly into the events of the Second Age. All right, next up. Irene Jobson writes, I love the music. I listen to Concerning Hobbits at night to sleep on repeat. Many, many nights, Irene, I pop on one of several, a Lord of the Rings music with background ambiance videos that are like 8 hours long. And so you and me both, Irene, you and me both. All right, Lucas J writes, this is my Star Wars. I think that's true for a lot of people.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, this is the first time that real movie magic happened for them. Like for me, it was Star Wars. But for other people, their very first exposure to real movie magic was probably Lord of the Rings.
I never really thought of it that way, but this is my Star Wars too. Because I never watched the original trilogy of Star Wars. This was my big, went to every movie when they came out, excited for the next one, mad at the time in between each one.
Having to wait a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that was another thing. The Lord of the Rings fever gripped the world. You know, and when everyone went and saw this and how exciting it was. Remember when the subsequent movies came out, it was huge. I mean,
It
it
was
was
hell
giant
waiting for
events,
that.
You know, people going like, "Oh my god!" And you know what else? This was a less cynical time where the thought that these movies would suck or something, it never even occurred to people. After seeing the first, once people realized what the first movie was, it was like, they can't wait. There was no question. The whole world's like, I can't wait.
I don't remember if at the end of every movie in the theater, did it say the next time the thing would come out?
Well, it was
Do you guys
already known.
remember?
It was
Yeah,
public
it was already
knowledge.
known.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
They actually, the first trailer, if you go back and you look at the announcement trailer, it tells you, it says when all three movies are coming
okay.
out.
Yeah.
So people knew.
Again, huge risk they took on that. All right. The man with the master plan writes, funny enough, my 14-year-old asked to start Lord of the Rings with me this weekend. Nice. And it's been like 10 years since my last watch. And all he nerded out at the you shall not pass scene because of a meme. Thank you and bring on the filthy. I'm telling you though, I think there are a lot of, look, everybody in the world, whether they've seen Star Wars or not, knows, no, Luke, I am your father. No, I am your father is the line. Everybody knows that line. Everybody knows that Darth Vader. People who have not seen Lord of the Rings know the you shall not pass line. I mean, that's just there for everybody. And dude, you know, we were talking about somebody else or a little bit earlier who is watches these movies with their mother every year. You watching this with your 14-year-old for the first time, dude, that's damn magic. Like, I don't have kids yet, but when I do, I know watching Star Wars and watching Lord of the Rings with them for the first time are going to be really damn special moments. So that's awesome, man. All right. K Major writes, Lord of the Rings is the only movie I own on multiple formats, DVD, special edition, Blu-ray special edition, and both on streaming 4K from Vudu. And I had the theatrical DVDs as well. I mean, again, it's one of the very, very few physical media things that I still have is my original Lord of the Rings DVDs. That's it. Everything else is on streaming.
Also, one of the very few where even me, the top level special features lover, went through the special features and slept through so much. There's so many special features on
10
it.
hours
It's
per movie.
longer than the movie.
Yeah, no, way longer than the movie. Multiple times longer than the movie. It's that and the Star Wars prequels are the best special features ever on disc.
I'll tell you
to me.
something that's really sad. When we were doing these special features, the interviews alone, there's hundreds of hours of interviews. And the final documentaries represent 10 hours. There's hundreds of hours for each movie that no one's ever seen.
Let me ask you this. I want to ask you this question. And be honest. As you and the teams you were working with were making the special features for Lord of the Rings, and you were out there in New Zealand, stuff like that, did you guys have any inkling that we are literally working on one of the great, what will go down in history as one of the greatest series of movies of all time? Like, did you actually have that sense?
Oh, no, absolutely we did. I mean, and we hadn't seen the movies yet, but after we knew even from beforehand, but once we started seeing this material and going through it, like it was, we took it so seriously that what we were doing, because we had so much material and everybody participated, that we were absolutely trying to do the greatest things ever done. I mean, the audio commentaries alone, John, the editorial involved in those audio commentaries, if you looked at the timelines, the editorial timelines, because there's four audio commentaries per disc, per movie, months worth of editorial work, because you're intercutting all of these things. I mean, the interviews, you know, I got to fly to London and I interviewed Christopher Lee for 5 hours. And
so cool.
And it was just, you know, it was the most amazing, and there's only 10 minutes of that interview on the disc, because a lot of it was just talking to him about his life and all this. And it was incredible. And part of some of my most wonderful memories in my entire professional career were working on these discs.
All right, next up, we've got Brad Johnson who writes, having read the books many times, I wasn't a fan of this movie when I saw it in theaters. My friend convinced me to watch the extended edition, and I loved it from that point forward.
Well, yeah, because the extended versions have a lot more of the book in them. And I can understand that. I have a friend that is a total Tolkien purist and doesn't like these movies. But these are, you have to understand, they're adaptations. You know, every book adaptation, like I love David Cronenberg's The Dead Zone, the adaptation of the Stephen King book. It's half the book. You know, he couldn't have gone back. These are an adaptation, and what they do is they capture the essence of Tolkien's story so well.
Was that Brad Jobson, you said?
Yes.
Oh, so him and Irene are 1-2 punching this super chat. She just sent the question before. They're married. They're the married couple of that.
Oh, I didn't know they were.
Irene and Brad Jobson.
Oh, there you
What's
go.
up?
I didn't even put that together. All right, next up, Chef Rigo.
Chef.
Chef Rigo writes in, let's see. Never seen any of these movies. Should I watch them before the Amazon Prime series? Also, sorry about my Star Trek Big Bang Theory joke, Rob. I love, don't you apologize for that. As far as should you go back and watch these movies, first of all, forget that there's an Amazon series coming. That's irrelevant. What are you doing? You need to go and watch the Lord of the Rings films, regardless of this thing coming out. So I would highly encourage going and watching this trilogy first. It'll probably give you a lot more context for the series. I don't know. What do you guys think?
And also, if you find you're just not into it after watching the first movie, even all three, then don't even bother watching the Amazon series.
No, look, I would say watch these because they're so enjoyable. If you're a fan of movies and a fan of storytelling and you like fantasy cinema, it doesn't get much better than this.
Yep.
I mean, do yourself a favor and watch the films. You'll be glad you did. You'll have a great time.
All right, next up, we got Brad Jobson, who also writes again, my expectations really got in the way on that initial watch. The extras were my favorite part of the release. You really felt like you were along for the ride with the cast and crew. I mean, again, I've talked to several people over time that, I mean, while it's inconceivable now, when the Lord of the Rings films first came out, there were, again, like there are today with the comic purists, there were Tolkien purists, who were like, well, they missed this, they missed that, and Tom Bombadil, and blah. It's
and
like
someone's line was given to someone else. Legolas didn't say this. Gimli said this,
and it's like, who the fuck cares? It's this is the movie, and the movie is one of the greatest things ever made. But it's understandable, Brad, because like we do that. Like if you read the comic book first, or in this case, you read the novel first, you go in with a certain set of expectations, and here's the thing, what makes you an advanced movie viewer is that you recognize, this is the problem, most people don't recognize, you recognize that you let your pre-existing expectations for it to be like the book get in the way. I'm glad you were able to stick it out, watch it again, even if it's the extended edition, and we're able to watch it with more of a clean slate on that sense. So that puts you ahead of the curve, man. That puts you way ahead of the curve. All right, Daniel Dang writes,
Dang.
imagine if we lived in an alternate universe where Stuart Townsend stayed on to play Aragorn instead of Viggo Mortensen. It's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine. But here's the thing. This is why I always say when people say nobody can play that role except that guy, what I always say to it now is you only say that because that's the guy you saw. Like, imagine if Peter Townsend did play it. I'm sure it would have been fine. Like,
What did he actually go on to do? Because that name doesn't sound familiar at all.
Stuart Townsend.
Yeah.
Did I say Peter Townsend?
Yeah.
Because that's a totally different guy.
What's he
He's been in
famous
a lot
for?
of things. Like he was in Queen of the Damned. He played Lestat in Queen of the
Okay.
Damned.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm sure it would have still been good. I'm sure the movie still would have been great. And as a matter of fact, a lot of people would probably today be saying nobody could have played it as good as Townsend did. Well, little do you know that in another universe, Viggo Mortensen played it, and it became kind of immortal. And that's kind of the thing. I mean, it's great the way it worked out. But if it hadn't been Viggo and they gave it to another guy, I'm sure it still would have been great. But yeah, that's why I always kind of laugh when somebody says nobody can play that role except that person. It's like, well, you're only saying because that's the person you saw.
I also love the way Viggo's hair would never dry. It's like he was Razor Ramoning it throughout the whole trilogy.
Like, always at least a little damp, right?
Because they're always outside, man.
They're always outside. All right. Next up, Ismail Montoya writes, the last quote Gandalf shared with Frodo was truly inspirational. All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you. That's how everyone feels who live in such times. We must decide to do what we do with the time that's given. this is a movie. Here's the thing. You can get a lot of great fantasy and genre films and have really cool creatures and monsters and a story and all that kind of stuff. This is a movie that is infinitely quotable. This movie is as quotable as Step Brothers, only on a much deeper level, right? Combined with the great action and visual effects and the story and the iconic characters and the legendary tale. It's filled with these moments like that. And like you can write an entire book just of the great re-quotable moments of the movie. And that is truly a great one, Ismail. All right. K Major writes, Samwise showing he is the original bro for life. Took a beat before I realized that was Mickey from Goonies. Sorry, Rob. Goonies and Sam never say die. And he was the boyfriend in Stranger Things. Like all of a sudden Samwise is showing up in there. No, it's true. Like the movie, look, one of the themes of it that Gandalf is constantly referring to is don't underestimate anybody. And like Gandalf even has a line in this thing. Hobbits are extraordinary. You can learn everything about them in a day, and yet after however long, they still surprise you. And even at the end of the trilogy, as I'm going to almost cry when we talk about this when we do get to Return of the King, but at the end of the film, when all of Gondor kneels, all of Middle-earth kneels to these four hobbits, there's an implied message here about even the smallest person, and Galadriel says that herself in the even the smallest person, right, can have this sort of a thing. And I think Samwise is a great illustration of that. We meet Samwise, and he's this shy guy who doesn't want to ask, what's the girl's name? Not Sandy, not...
I can't... you mean, yeah.
Guys, what's the name of the Hobbit barmaid?
Played by Sean Astin's actual wife.
Really?
Yeah.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
Was it Stacy? What was that girl's name? Rosie.
Rosie,
Irene
right.
Jobson's the one who got it. Rosie. Ryan Cleary also got it. Theater Pup also got it. A few others got it as well. Rosie. Ron Fraser got it. Curtis got it. So he's just this kind of shy, bubbling guy. Rosie. He's the bumbling guy outside the window that, poor Samwise got banged over the head by Gandalf, pulled in. Oh, nothing, sir. I heard something about a ring in the end of the world, but nothing. Keep up, Samwise. And blah. But he's the hero of the story. And I just love how Tolkien and Peter Jackson, by extension, play that theme out on a grand scale and then on a micro scale just with the individual character himself, which is pretty awesome. All right. Thanks for that, K Major. Next up, Brad Jobson writes, I still have the original DVD release. I love how they look like books. It's true. They look amazing. Yep. The original DVD releases, Brad, absolutely look fantastic. That's why it's one of the very, very few pieces of physical media I hold on to. That and my Battlestar Galactica discs. All right. Next up, K Major writes, can we give a moment of silence to that one dude who was just trying to do his job guarding the door to Bree, the prancing pony? He got straight up mowed down by the ringwraith.
Oh, yeah.
He deserved better. Yeah. All right, I meant no offense, young masters or little masters, whatever. By the way, dumb question, I never looked it up, but I was watching the movie last night. Was that guy the same guy who's the janitor at Hogwarts in the Harry Potter movies?
Oh, I don't know.
That's wow.
I would imagine not.
I mean, probably not. But I watch it, and I even turned to Anne, who's a total Potterhead. I was like, is that the same guy who's kind of like the caretaker in Hogwarts? And she's like, you know what? I don't know. So I'm just throwing it out there. I've got somebody, Robert Voss is saying that it's not. So is Daniel Dang. They're saying it's not. Okay, it's not. But I'm just for a minute, the way his
That would
face
have been
looked.
funny.
That would have been really funny. Yeah, that poor guy just doing his job totally gets slammed by the ringwraiths. Okay. Next up, Ryan Launer writes, Gandalf's death is the only time someone screaming no has ever not seemed silly to me. That was quite a scene knowing nothing about the books. It's the difference between understanding the moment and not. Yeah, Gandalf falls and it's like, no. But that was done authentically. It was done powerfully. Contrast that against, I don't know, Star Wars Revenge of the Sith. Padme died. And you killed her. No. I mean, it's fundamentally misunderstanding the moment and understanding how it comes across. In The Lord of the Rings, it comes across organic and authentic and real and emotional, whatever. It came across as a punchline in the other one. And that's not an easy thing to do. Right? So that was a really good example of how it's done right. All right. Next up, K Major writes, Agent Smith had me so conflicted during the 2000s. Yep, because first, on one hand, he's Elrond. The other hand, he's totally Agent Smith. I mean, I love him. And of course, he was Red Skull as well.
Yes, he was.
Still the best Red Skull we've ever had. Ty Burton writes, the way that the score takes over during the breaking of the Fellowship sequence is absolutely breathtaking. It reminds me of how the music completely commands the finale of E.T. I, of course, have told, just to that end, Ty, I've told the story before, but I was at the annual, Ann and I, go every year to the John Williams concert. And twice now, they've done the final scene, the final segment of E.T. with John Williams and his orchestra playing the music to it. And it's with the visuals up on the big screen and the playing, it's so powerful and moving. And that's a great, great example of that, Ty. Well done. All right. Shaggy5567 writes, longtime viewer since AMC. Thank you so much. Never sent a chat until now, but I had to for my favorite movies of all time and the only movies I cry with each watch. Thanks. Tell you what, Shaggy, I said it a little bit earlier, when we get to Return of the King, there is no scene in any movie other than maybe the ending of Life is Beautiful with Roberto Benigni that I don't want to cry than when Aragorn says to the hobbits, my friends, you bow to no one, and him and all of Middle-earth bow to four hobbits. Tears, man. Tears. Massive chest pounding with and Rohan shall answer. Massive chest pounding when that every time that happens, I pound my chest like, grr, you're not a man unless you do that. But tears at that moment, dude. Absolute tears. All right, thanks a lot for saying that in, man. Thanks for being around for so long, Shaggy. Appreciate that, dude. All right, Ryan Launer writes, this movie was just a few months after 9/11, and spending 3 hours of this in this fantasy world was exactly what a lot of people needed. You know what? I don't even remember that.
Yeah, because it was November of 2001.
My goodness, I didn't even, I don't put that, but that would have been
2.5 months after 9/11.
Yeah. Totally this idea of a movie the world needed at that time. A movie the world needed. Thanks for reminding us about that, Ryan. That's great. All right. K Major writes again. Has anyone ever noticed that Gandalf gave a slight sigh of relief when Frodo initially said there were no more markings on the ring? The face completely changed when he said, wait. Oh, yeah. I totally noticed that, because he's almost certain that this is it. This is the frickin' ring of power. It's back. That means, he says, what do you see? Well, first of all, Gandalf is a dick, right? Because he gets the ring and says, oh, it's quite cool. How do you know it's quite cool? He takes the ring out of the fire and says, hold out your hand, Frodo. Oh, but it's quite cool. Yeah, what if it wasn't? That's a dick. That's a dick move right there. But anyway, Drop says, Marky, what do you see? He's waiting a moment, concerned. And then he says, nothing. Ian McKellen, man, just the way he acted that scene with his expression. Oh, wait, there's markings. Fuck. Like that look on his face, right? It was totally beautifully, beautifully done. All right. Next up, we've got Late Night Album, who writes, rewatched Lord of the Rings in theaters. Significant pieces of the score were altered. The score connecting to Enya's May It Be abruptly stops instead of segueing into her track. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I don't know anything about that. Have you heard anything about that? Either of you guys?
No, I don't know how they would change it.
I mean, I don't know why they would have changed it. What would have been the...
I don't know. I mean, if it's over the end credits, for the extended versions, they've added all the people from the OneRing.net. They added everybody's name at the end. So maybe the theatrical versions were showing and the music wasn't the same. I'm not sure.
All right. We move on to Ron Frazier, who writes, such a fantastic movie. One, really the whole trio of movies where the music is its own character. It really is, because look, in movies, when a character enters a scene, if you've done the character well, the character entering the scene changes the mood of the audience watching it. When Vader walks in a room, you feel it. When Aragorn walks into a room, you feel it. When Batman walks into a room, you feel it. When, depending on which movie iteration it is, when Martin Luther King walks into a room, you feel it. When the music starts to play, you instantly recognize it as if it had a face. And it alters the feeling in the room, Ron. So you're absolutely 100% right with that observation, dude. It absolutely is. All right, K Major writes, I've tried to purchase the many swords of the film. I've been to many, medieval fairs and things like that, and like even at different conventions, there'll always be sword makers there, and there's always, what's the name of the sword again? The sword of the king, the sword that was broken and is now remade.
Isildur's sword.
It was Isildur's sword, but I can't remember.
Oh, not his Glamdring is Gandalf's sword.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys in the live chat remember the actual name of the sword.
Reforged.
Anduril.
Yeah, Anduril.
Anduril. Narsil. The sword, right? I've seen that many, many times, but there's so many iconic swords in it that you could totally do that. All right, next up. We've got Daya writes, this, along with Star Wars, is the best score ever. Yeah, listen, obviously the Star Wars, this is the difference between Star Wars, though, and these are two perfect examples of two contrasting things that are both equally valuable. With the Lord of the Rings, let's start with Star Wars. With Star Wars, you have the most memorable pieces of music. Doesn't matter if it's the main theme, Leia's theme, the Imperial March, right? All these tunes are instantly recognizable, hummable, blah, blah, blah. Lord of the Rings, and this is a contrast in styles between John Williams and Howard Shore as well. Lord of the Rings, the music accompanies the scene. It accentuates the scenes, right? And both are fantastic and great. They just take different approaches to it. But yeah, that's a great example. All right, next up. We got Kara writes, which versions of Lord of the Rings do you prefer, the theatrical or extended cuts? Well, we were kind of talking about, for me, it's theatrical. For Rob, it's extended. But I like them. The answer is I like them both. I like them both. The movie is the regular theatrical things. That's the movie. There's a lot of great stuff in the extended stuff, though. And if you are a fan of the original films, you owe it to yourself to watch the extended ones for sure. All right, next up. We've got Joel, who writes, my wife woke up to me watching this and in my Lord of the Rings shirt while wearing the necklace with the ring and holding a replica of Frodo's sword. All I will say is that should be a moment when your wife realizes how lucky she is. If you're married to the right woman, that's when your wife should realize she's married the right man. But that's probably not what happened. It's probably not the case. But I think that's very manly, dude. All right, next up, Connor writes, my God, when Arwen summons the river on the Nazgul, glorious and beautiful. Top 3 favorite scene in cinematic history. It is really great.
And the water as the horses. You know, the horse heads coming out. I love that so much. It's so great. It
was just, well, because remember, before she left, she says, the power of my people will protect me. What does that mean? Oh, that's what that means. You want to attack Rivendell? Good luck. You go right ahead and you attack Rivendell. All right. Next up, John S. writes, I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udin. You cannot pass. That's a great damn speech. And it's hard to imagine, although I'm sure it would have been awesome as well, Sean Connery saying that line.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about that. I mean, I'm sure many of you watching right now, you know that originally cast and the one Peter Jackson kind of made this role for was Sean Connery. Sean Connery didn't really get it and decided he was still going to do it, but ultimately decided to do another movie that he was kind of the producer of that he thought was going to be a better thing for him to do, called The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Wah, wah. I mean, Sean Connery's a god, all right? But make no mistake. But yeah, one of the more hindsight mistakes in cinematic history.
One of the things that drove him from the business was that movie.
Yeah, I mean, it was such a flop.
Working with Stephen Norrington, he hated the director.
And you know, I worked on that movie.
I didn't.
You didn't?
I don't think I did.
When I worked with the visual effects company, that was but one of the very first real movies. Because we'd been doing a lot of smaller stuff, like marketing company stuff. We'd get us to do. We did some commercials and things like that. But then we got subcontracted by a bigger Hollywood visual effects company. By the way, that's what happens in this business. The visual effects companies get contracted for like 1,500 shots, but they don't have the manpower to do 1,500 shots. So they actually subcontract out like 500 of those shots. Anyway, we were one of those subcontractors. And it's one of the first movies we ever made. And yeah, it was so bad that it drove Sean Connery out of the business. It was his love guru that drove Mike Myers out of the business for so long. It's really unfortunate because he could have been Gandalf. But hey,
I think it worked out well.
It worked out just fine. Ian McKellen, Magneto. All right, next up. Raymond Verrata writes, Elijah appeared at a talk show years later and someone shouted, "Frodo lives." Elijah replied, "Still?" Still? Really? I mean, I wish Elijah would have done more after Lord of the Rings. Because honestly, the best thing I can remember him from, most notably, was Sin City. And I don't even think he had any lines in that.
He was in that?
Yeah.
He did a lot of,
He
he's
was
done a
the
lot of
psycho.
stuff that he's done some stuff.
Didn't he do a Fargo TV show or something like that?
Did he do? I
No,
never
it was
saw
the one with the
Fargo
dog. The one with the dog.
Yes,
And it
where
was
the dog-
good.
It's actually everybody sees a dog, but then it's just for us, it's just a giant guy in a dog suit.
Right.
That's right. I forgot about
That was a
one.
good show.
I never watched it.
Or at least the first season was. I thought it was pretty good.
I mean, he was so talented. I wish he'd done more. All right, next up, we got Rampage Predacon who writes, "How do you rank the movies in this trilogy?" I don't. I mean, look,
See, that's where.
at the end of the day, I think the greatest single achievement, technically, of any movie in history is Return of the King. When you combine all the various elements and stuff like that. I'm not saying I think it's the greatest movie of all time, but I think it's the single greatest achievement, like what can really be done, especially over 20 years ago. And it holds the record for the most Academy Award wins in history. No film in history has ever won more Academy Awards.
It won everyone it was nominated for.
It was nominated for 11 awards. It won 11 awards.
You know, they talk about that. Like Peter Jackson has spoken about that, going he would have felt bad if somebody lost. You know, everybody won except.
Well, imagine if you're the one. But what's interesting, no acting awards.
No.
It was seen as such an ensemble piece that there was no acting nominations, but it was nominated for 11 and won 11. And again, there are two other films that won 11, but no film in history has ever won more. And to this day, and I don't know if that's a record that's ever going to be broken. I mean, everybody says that, and eventually they do get broken.
I have a personal rule where if there's like a series and all of them are so close in quality, I always say the first one is my favorite. With Rocky 1's the best. This one, I'll say Fellowship's the best. Harry Potter, I say the first Harry Potter's the best because they're kids still. And I love, like...
Prisoner of Azkaban, man.
Yeah,
Come on.
but, everyone could... they're all good, so I can't really rank them.
All right, next up, we've got Jedediah Elias who writes, "Might be my favorite of trilogy, although Return of the King's third act easily overtakes it. Love how grounded the first chapter feels. A simple and moving story about brotherhood. So glad first time watch was in IMAX last year." Ooh, you got to watch it for the first time in IMAX last year. That's pretty awesome. Again, this is a trilogy that builds. Because you're right, it's a small, it feels weird to call Fellowship of the Ring a smaller scale film. It's huge. But then you move into Two Towers and you got like the Battle of Helm's Deep and it gets grander.
Helm's Deep, baby.
Then you're like, how do you top that? Oh, I don't know. And then they move into Return of the King. And it just gets bigger and bigger and grander and never loses any of its...
How's a billion undead sound
Yeah,
to you?
yeah, go ahead. Try that. And then, oh, God, there's so many amazing moments in that final battle. Like, it's just, I can't wait for us to get to it. I cannot wait for us to get to it. I can't wait for us to talk about Two Towers. All right, next up. Raymond Verrata writes, "The 3D wall projection at the top of Salesforce Tower in San Francisco has the Eye of Sauron every Halloween."
Oh.
Does that? I didn't. That's hilarious.
That is
Every
hilarious.
Halloween? That's cool, man.
Did you ever notice, Ray? There's a cheesecake factory we go to in Riverside, and when you go into it, all their posts, I'm sure it's not intentional, but all the posts Ann and I see it every time. They look like the Eye of Sauron.
Oh,
Every time we go and we're like, why is this place decorated with the Eye of Sauron all over the place? And it's not meant to look like the Eye of Sauron, but it looks like that all over the place. All right, and final one here. We just had Philly G send in a super chat just to be supportive. And guys, that will draw to a close this meeting of Movie Club. Thank you guys so much for being here with us as we talk about truly one of our favorite movies of all time, Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring. Once again, I want to remind you guys there will not be a movie club next week because we're going to be in Vegas at CinemaCon doing a lot of reporting and a lot of videos from there. So we're going to wait 2 weeks, we'll be back, and we're going to be doing Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, so make sure you guys join us for that. I want to thank the guys sitting here with me, Robert Meyer Burnett. Robert, where can people follow you online?
You can find me on Instagram at RM Burnett, find me on Twitter at BurnettRM, or find me on my own YouTube channel, Post Geek Singularity, and postgeeksingularity.com.
And, of course, Ray Aura. Ray, where can people follow you?
You can find me at Ray Aura with a 0, and Ray Aura with a 0, and Ray Aura with a 0, and Ray Aura with a 0.
That's where you get them. And you guys can follow me on Instagram or Twitter, simply at John Campea. Guys, thanks so much for hanging out with us today. It is so much fun doing Movie Club, just to pick one movie, focus on it, talk about it for a couple hours. So great. Thank you guys for being here with us. That'll do it for us for now, guys. Thanks a lot for being here. My name's John Campea, and until next time, my friends, fly, you fools.